Martio here. Welcome to another week, and a busy week it'll be. We're going to start off this week with the last part of the Gary Moore story. Now, we've covered everything that Gary's done, from his solo stuff to all his early bands. But in between all that, he did do some collaboration work. So I thought today we'd take a few minutes to look at the other stuff. And there's some people, some fans out there that don't know if they know about this stuff. So I thought I would do it. So there's 4 to look at. So there's not many, but they're all good. I like all of them. I like everything practically that Gary Moore has ever put out. And so we're going to start at number 4. And this album was released by the Gary Moore Band, and it was released in 1973. And he put the band together after he'd left Skid Row. He signed to CBS Records, and the album that he brought out was this one, Grinding Stone. And Gary was a little bit unsure about the direction he wanted to make his music in, so consequently this album features different styles. There are bluesy tracks and Latino rhythms, slide guitars, so it's all pretty good stuff. And he actually split this band up so he could join Thin Lizzy after a replacement for Eric Bell. So on this album we have Gary Moore on lead guitars and vocals, John Curtis on the bass, Pierce Kelly on the drums. Additional personnel is Frank Boylan on bass, Philip Donnelly on the rhythm guitar, and Iain Shanhalis on keyboards. First track on here is a 9-minute instrumental just called Grinding Stone. It's a very interesting track. First it starts off with some great rock between the guitars, and it's that sort of Celtic Thin Lizzy sound, and then it goes off into some jazz fantasy, which is incredible. I really like this track, even though it's 9 minutes long. Yeah, really is interesting. I consider it to be very, very good. And then it goes back into the rock track. How cool's that? Rock, jazz, rock. Excellent track. Then we get a track called Time to Heal. Now this is a real killer rock track. Some great guitar work from Gary on this. There's a little bit of keyboard in here that really does give it some effect and depth. Really strong track. Then we get a track called Sail Across the Mountain. Now this is probably one of the weaker tracks on the album. As Gary has stated, that he didn't know what direction he was going in. This has got little bits of everything in there, and it sort of doesn't flow very well. I mean, Gary's guitar work is superb, as it always has been, but it just a bit confusing, that track. Then we have another little instrumental called The Energy Dance. Now this is quite funny. He got a keyboard sound that wasn't sort of around in 1973. It should have been in the 80s, but it was 1973. But it's pretty atmospheric. Another really good track. Then we get this 17-minute epic called Spirit. It's one of them fusion ones with rock and jazz, the sort of thing he did with Colosseum 2. It's 17 minutes of pure brilliance. You get some vocal, and then you get some improv thing. It's absolutely fantastic. That's a great track. And then we have my favourite track on here, and it's called Boogie My Way Home. This is my favourite track because I just love boogie rock. You know that boogie shuffle sound you get with Quo and Foghat? It's that sort of... I just love that sort of sound, and ZZ Top style as well. Excellent stuff. It was the last track. I think this is a great album just because it's my number 4 of this sort of collaborations. Doesn't mean I dislike this. I love this album. I play this a lot. There isn't a bad track on here, although we got that weak one that's a bit disjointed. the playing on it is fantastic. So I'm going to give this an RTO ranking of 8 out of 10. Okay, then coming in at number 3 is an album called G-Force. Now, it's an album that they put out because they thought it was more commercial than Dirty Fingers. Remember that this was recorded around about the same time as Dirty Fingers, but this is the one they put out because Dirty Fingers didn't come out until the 80s. So on here we've got Gary Moore on guitars, leading backing vocals and keyboard and string arrangements, Willie D on lead and backing vocals and bass and keyboards, Tony Newton on the bass, Mark Nusif on the drums, and additional personnel is Joachim Kuhn on additional keyboards and Tom Scott on the saxophone and the Ox on marimba. First track on here is called You. Very similar to this. This is it's the weakest track on the album, but it's still that rock sound that he had, you know, the Dirty Fingers and that early sort of Gary Moore solo stuff. It's a good rocker, but it is the weakest track on the album. Then we get the absolutely brilliant White Knuckles, Rockin' and Rollin'. Now he played. I saw Gary Moore play this. It's one of them tracks that to us it's still a Gary Moore solo track these days. It's absolutely brilliant. You start off with one of Gary's great licks, and Rockin' and Rollin' is just absolutely out the top drawer. It's my favourite track on here, and it is actually one of my favourite tracks by Gary Moore. Then we get She's Got You, another great track. Got some great riffs in this, driving Gary Moore riffs. You can, you know, when you hear these riffs, you can imagine him pulling them great facial expressions that Gary was renowned for. It's a killer track. I Look at You, definitely the worst track on the album. I just don't like that one at all. It's a little bit wishy-washy for me. Because of Your Love, another great rocker, great vocal from Gary on this. The guitar licks are just top drawer again. You Kiss Me Sweetly, it's okay. The keyboard line is a bit 80s, but the rest of the song's good. Then we get a track called Hot Gossip. Really nice track. It reminds me of the post-punk Elvis Costello sort of thing. Really good. Then The Woman's in Love, one of my favourite tracks. It's got an absolute killer bass line. Solid track. Dancing. Great guitar solo on this. Absolutely killer. A really good album. As I said, a bit of a controversial when the record company thought this was better than Dirty Fingers. As much as I like this album, I really do like this album, I thought Dirty Fingers was a better album. And I think they should have released Dirty Fingers and then put this one out later. Because it's not a Gary Moore solo album, it's a band sort of thing. But it's still a great album. It's got some killer tracks on it. So I'm going to give this an RTO ranking of 8.5. Okay then, coming in at number 2, we go right up to the 21st century now. Now this is an album that he put out in 2002, and the band was called Scars. And it's not to be confused with the Edinburgh post-punk band called Scars. So Gary decided to form a band with ex-Skunk Anise bassist Cass Lewis and Primal Scream drummer Darrin Mooney. And Darrin Mooney has played on a lot of Gary's blues albums. So it's Gary Moore, Cass Lewis and Darrin Mooney on the drums. First track on here is called When the Sun Goes Down. Really good track. It's a typical 3-piece rock track. Great bass line from Cass Lewis. Really good bass player. Some great drums from Darrin. Fantastic track. Rectify. Love this track. Darrin's drumming is great on this again, and you got that great bass line that you got in the early Skunk albums, and some really rich guitar work from Gary. Then we get Wasn't Born in Chicago. I'm not as keen on this one. There's two sort of basses, electronic and funky, and it doesn't suit the track, to be quite honest. So I'm not a lover of that. Stand Up, again, just great rock from a trio. Solid playing from everybody. Excellent track. Then my favourite on this one is called Just Can't Let You Go. What I like about this, it starts off very gentle. Really, you thought, oh, we got a nice ballad. Then comes the power riffs from Gary. That bass line is booming away. Brilliant track. My favourite. Then we get My Baby, She So Good to Me. Bluesy number. Some great guitar licks. Darrin's drumming is brilliant. I mean, he's a solid drummer and he's good at the blues. And he played on a majority of them later blues albums with Gary. And World of Confusion, again, Darrin's drumming is just superb on that. Then we get Ball and Chain, which is my second favourite track on here. It's a bluesy track, even though it's 12 minutes long, it's pure magic from Gary. World Keep Turning, another great track. Love this one of my favourites. Some solid playing. Then we get Who Knows What Tomorrow May Bring, another great blues track. Cassie's incredible bass line. The performance, again, by everybody is superb on that track. One of my favourite tracks. That was the last track. This album has got that mixture of great rock and blues. Love playing this album. This is a little gem from Gary. And I'm going to give this an RTO ranking of 9.5. So my number one. Now, we've already featured this album in a one-off album, but you cannot do a Gary Moore story without putting this in. So this is the reason why we've really done the collaborations album as well, so I can talk about this album again. It came out in 1993, and it's BBM. And the album's called Around the Next Dream. Now, BBM is Baker, Bruce and Moore. So basically, it's Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce and Gary Moore. So it's sort of a reincarnation of Cream without Eric. And if you're going to have a great blues player, you might as well throw Gary Moore in. Did very well for them. It got to number 9 in the UK album charts. I brought this when it came out, and it's a killer album. So, first track on this one is Waiting in the Wings. Oh, what a track. It just takes you back to Cream. Jack's vocal is brilliant. Love this track. City of Gold, one of my favourite tracks on this album. I just love that riff from Gary. And then the vocal from Jack is great again. Ginger's drumming. It's as close as you're going to get to. This was the closest we was going to get to Cream. Before they did do their reunion eventually, but this was the nearest thing we was going to get it. Where in the World? Now Gary takes over on the vocals on here, and Jack sort of does in the back. But Jack has all played with Gary on some of his solo stuff, so it's not like the first time they've worked together. And they sound really good together. It's a brilliant track. Brilliant track. Can't Fool the Blues. You know, Gary must have felt he was in his element. He was playing with two legends. And Gary's a legend himself. So you got these three great players just absolutely having a swell time. Brilliant. It's a brilliant track. Some great guitar playing. Ginger's drumming's solid. Lovely bass line from Jack. High Cost of Loving, another great track written by Alan Jones and Sherwin Hamlet. That's really good. Glory Days, This is very cream, and I love it. You know, Gary fitted in with Ginger and Jack perfectly. Love that track. And then we get my favourite track, Why Does Love Have to Go Wrong? Again, it does remind me of so much of the Cream stuff, and Gary just fitted in like an old pair of slippers into this. Great, what a song. Naked Flame. This is a Gary Moore song. It's one of them songs that time and time again we heard this sort of sound on Gary's blues albums. It's brilliant. Then they do an Albert King cover. Wait, Gary can't do a bluesy album without some Albert King, and it's a great cover of this song. I Wonder Why You Are So Mean to Me. Fantastic song. Ginger Baker's drumming is brilliant in this. Jack Bruce, top guys. Then the last track on here is The Wrong Side of Town. Wonderful vocal from Jack Bruce. It's a really sort of smoky room blues track. You can imagine them having the big old-fashioned microphones, and it's just a great track. Not a bad track on this album. Every track is just brilliant. It's sad that all three of these musicians have sadly left us now. This is a pretty special album. This is the nearest to a Cream studio album we got. Gary was a great replacement, and I play this album to death. It's to me, it's one of the perfect blues albums. That's how much I love it. So there's only one mark I can give this, and it's the same one I gave it when I did it before, because I can't change it. It's 10 out of 10. If you've never heard this album, go and check it out. Okay, so that's the Gary Moore story. It's always nice, and it's one I want. This was one of mine that I wanted to do, and I love Gary Moore. I think you can tell. So, who's next week? Well, if you want to find out, you have to tune into the live stream or watch the little What's On Next video. It's a good one as well. So always good. And this next one will be a viewer's request, where it's a viewer. It's one of my best friends, Lee. It's one of his choices. So that's all for this. Hope you've enjoyed Gary Moore, and I know there's one or two of you that have actually listened to some stuff that you didn't know Gary was involved with, which is what this is entirely all about. Okay, classic album today, which is coming up next, is probably one of the first proper electronic bands, and a band that influenced so many people in electronic music. And that we're talking about German electronic band Kraftwerk, and we're going to look at their classic album Autobahn. So if you're into that, I know there's one person that is, one of my new friends that I've met on Rachel's Ghost, Dees, all the way from Tel Aviv in Israel. He is a huge Kraftwerk fan, and he's looking forward to this one. So I will see you later. Bye for now.